Woman keeps finding shoes in her backyard before making an unsettling discovery. BJ Ross spotted a random shoe in her yard in Altoona, Pennsylvania. It wasn't hers or anyone else's in her family, so she tossed it in the trash can. Though not much later, another stray sneaker poked out of the grass. Pretty soon, finding lone footwear on her property was a daily practice that left BJ stumped. Where were the shoes coming from? Who would do such a thing, and why was her home the dumping ground? She intended to find out. At first, the shoes didn't bother BJ that much, but after a while, their presence felt like trophies taken from the scene of a crime. She didn't believe anything nefarious was happening per se. It was just the thought of someone wandering around her home that unsettled her. BJ's mother suggested that she hold on to the shoes to piece together the mystery, or at least in case their owners came looking for them. And while the appearance of the shoes were pretty strange, it wasn't the first time she'd found random objects in her yard. There was an inkling in the back of BJ's mind who the culprit might be. Her cat, Jordan. The suspect was unlikely. BJ didn't think it was possible for her 6-pound kitty to carry objects that were nearly half of its weight. Though this wasn't the first instance of Jordan showing up with surprising treats. On Facebook, BJ detailed the laundry list of items he'd previously brought home. Dead mice, live snakes, dead and live birds, garbage including an empty chip bag, and rubber gloves. Before she blamed Jordan for these bad deeds, BJ needed concrete proof. She decided to install a camera in her backyard to observe Jordan's nightly activities and determine once and for all the identity of the shoe bandit. When BJ rolled back the footage, she saw glowing eyes flash past the camera, and lo and behold, there was Jordan, caught red-pawed with a shoe in his mouth. All this time, her cat was leading a double life. The film revealed incredible feats of strength. Every night, Jordan made his rounds in the area, searching for shoes to steal. As the footage showed, the kitty was capable of scurrying up and over fences while maintaining a grip on the stolen goods. The saga was only beginning. BJ needed to know more about these escapades. See, during the day, Jordan presents like your average house cat. In fact, he seems pretty lazy, napping the day away. Now his family knows that all those hours spent snoozing were actually intentional rest in preparation for his nights of thieving. They needed to know the depths of his activity. If Jordan were a person, his smug little way of flaunting his stolen goods wouldn't be nearly as charming. However, because he's a naughty, fluffy cat burglar, his backyard patch of wrongdoing is pretty dang cute. BJ was floored by Jordan's nighttime habits. After the impressive display of his cat reflexes and agility, she was curious to see how far he was traveling each night. So she fixed a GPS tracker to Jordan's collar, and the results they gathered were even crazier. Looking at Jordan's route on a typical night prowling for shoes revealed to be much more involved than BJ imagined. In a single evening, her cat covered between 7 and 8 miles of ground. With the mystery solved, BJ turned to solve the other glaring problem. Her home was a hub for all Jordan's loot. She decided to make a Facebook group in order to come clean about her kitty cat's crimes and return all that he'd stolen. Thankfully, all of BJ's neighbors took the cat burglar news pretty well. They were happy to track down the location of their children's boots and slightly honored that Jordan had chosen their footwear to target. Many people joined the Facebook group to encourage Jordan's life of crime. They love tracking his nightly progress to see how far he's gone or what he's dragged home on his latest haul. Jordan might be the most transparent thief in history. Throughout the exposure of his criminal career, Jordan didn't show a shred of remorse. In fact, he seemed satisfied with all the attention, the mark of a true maniac. Just when everyone thought the jig was up, the bad boy kept thieving. Since his criminal reveal, Jordan's stolen shoe count has passed 50 pairs and only continues to rise. Sometimes he watches indifferently as the neighbors collect their shoes, the ultimate power move. Will this guy ever learn? If the public has any say, then probably not. The more he steals, the more the people love him. Jordan receives tons of fan mail, from packages loaded with treats and toys, to portraits and letters. Every once in a while, he's sent a spare shoe to add to his collection. News of the cat shoe swiping operation gathered viral attention. The local press tried to get a comment from Jordan in response, but he had nothing to say. With a swish of his tail, he traipsed off down the street. When it comes to her sticky-pawed feline, BJ has a major moral blind spot. Despite his bad behavior, Jordan is still very much her beloved baby. He's still welcomed home warmly each night after depositing his plunder. Jordan is proof that the neighborhood cats and dogs that wander the streets might not be as innocent as they seem. Incredibly, Jordan found an unlikely accomplice in his quest for shoe domination. The accomplice was discovered by Christian Meyer, who had bought himself a brand new high-end pair of sneakers. As a psychologist and mental well-being coach, he understood the importance of exercise, and he was more than ready to get back out and hit the ground running. The weather was nice in his quiet neighborhood of Zehlendorf, Berlin, and the streets were thick with trees. It almost didn't feel like a city at all. Rather, it felt like a small rural community, a place where Christian felt safe leaving his belongings on the porch overnight. For a short while, all was well. The sun was shining, his daily runs were invigorating, and life seemed to be going great. However, Christian's joy would be short-lived. One morning, he went out onto his porch and got a bad surprise. One of his very expensive new sneakers, which he'd left by the door, was missing. Confused, Christian looked around to see if it had fallen off the porch or if he'd kicked it into a bush by mistake, but the shoe was nowhere to be found. Luckily, Christian was close with his neighbors, so he began asking around to find out if they'd seen anything. Perhaps a young prankster had come up and collected his single shoe, but nobody had witnessed the crime. They did have similar stories to share, though. Some neighbors also complained that they discovered missing shoes recently, but until Christian called attention to it, they chalked it up to their own absent-mindedness. Now a mystery was beginning to form. With multiple reports of missing shoes, Christian couldn't help but to investigate further. A few days went by, and he waited to see if more shoes disappeared, but none did, at least not yet. Then, one evening, he heard a rustling outdoors. He looked out and caught a glimpse of a young fox trotting by the house with 2 blue flip-flops in its mouth. Though the creature soon vanished, Christian quickly formed a plan. The next time he saw the fox, he'd follow it and hopefully find his lost shoe. This was a commitment that was easy to make in his head, but following through would prove difficult. A few days later, the golden opportunity arrived. There was the fox, cheekily trotting through the yard like he'd done nothing wrong. Christian slipped on a pair of non-fancy shoes and hurried out the door, being careful not to startle the fox. It darted into a nearby thicket, and Christian pursued. The woodsy environment he'd come to love about Zehlendorf now proved to be the bane of his pursuit. Sticks and brambles caught his clothes, and leaves got into his hair. He had followed the fox through the dense underbrush for nearly an hour, and was almost ready to give up when the animal slowed down near a divot in the ground. As Christian drew closer, he realized what it was: the fox's den. While the fox hid, he crept up and took a peek, and he couldn't believe his eyes. The den was full of shoes, almost 100 of them, and hardly any 2 were a match. Strangely enough, the fox seemed to prefer Crocs, as nearly every color of Croc was represented. Christian retrieved the shoes in bundles and brought them into a clearing. After he laid them all out, he contacted his neighbors, who told him of their similar problem, and they were able to come identify and retrieve their lost shoes. Sadly, Christian's missing fancy sneaker was not among those found, but there could be other fox thieves nearby. The town of Foren in western Germany had a similar problem, in which a mother fox stole 120 shoes in a single night for her cubs to play with. A writer in London, who was particularly frustrated with foxes in his garden, woke up one morning to find 7 mismatched shoes placed neatly in the middle of his lawn. Similarly, a woman in Melbourne caught video footage of a fox stealing 3 boots off her porch. In an even cleverer heist, a Japanese pair of foxes with a taste for sandals was discovered working as a team to steal over 40 pairs. It took 5 Kyoto police officers to surround the duo and rein them in before the spoils could be returned to their rightful owners. Why have the sly creatures done this? It seems that, like dogs, they like to chew on the shoes, as most of the footwear Christian found had been mildly gnawed. Crocs seem like they have a good, springy texture for chewing. Fox cubs go through teething phases, and it's likely that the shoes help alleviate discomfort as the young animal's sharp incisors are growing. Regardless of the reason, you can avoid a similar fate for your shoes by just storing them indoors. We're not sure how foxes discovered that shoes were nice to chew on, but they've been known to play with dogs who might be the worst shoe chewers of all. Don't get mad at these furry red goofballs, though. They're just chewing away some stress from a major threat to their existence.